We are going to talk about the developments in the south of Brazil and yet the soybean rally at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and yet a little bit about wheat. Right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. So, Jerry, can you wrap it up the markets over this week, we starting with corn and then switching to soybean?
Well, both earlier this week we had a little bit of a spunk going on yet in the corn because of the fact that the weekly crop conditions and the progress numbers were muted because of last week's U.S. planting progress, and that we slipped behind the U.S. average by 4 or 5%, 5-year average. And to some extent, the 5-year average has 2 years that were pretty tough in there. So I'd have to say that to some extent, usually the kind of classic uh, measuring stick is 60%. By May 15th. Well, the number was based upon 2 or 3 days ahead of that, and also the fact that the number was only 49% from there. And on the soybean side, the average came in just, I think, right at the 35% number. Actually, it might have been 1%. Either side of that on the 5-year average from there. So that provided our most enthusiasm for the week, though, as basically the market activities didn't really find a lot of excitement in the world markets. Didn't We had the excitement about the frost and things like that in Ukraine? Oh no, excuse me, in Russia. From there and that, but. To some extent, the crop tour for wheat did kind of take over the mindset here of this market as they watch the results come in, as the uh, a group called the Wheat Quality Council has done this particular tour for many, many years. And that actually I was on it probably 15 years ago or more. And they take off from Manhattan and they go out to a major town in northwest Kansas called Colby, which then transfers across there and then moves down through southwest Kansas and then on around to Wichita and the second night, and then they come back and put together their estimates. So that particular thing had lots of focus on price activity, and so from there, the corn market didn't. With the wheat market getting some pretty hefty numbers, we had some pretty good yield prospects really across the northern parts of Kansas versus what we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years. Pretty scratchy looking stuff south of Scotch City and on towards Liberal and across the west, central, and southern areas of Kansas. Really, the wheat country really is west of I-35 in the state of Kansas. So that was the interesting feature. The numbers have come out of there, though, has caused some consternation at this point. When the yields came in on an average 49 in the northern areas, 42 in that southwest area, and then turned around and had a decent number on the 50s going up from Wichita back to Kansas, back to Manhattan. But it turns up their average of 46.5 times the USDA's harvested acres didn't really match up with the 290 million that the tour came up with. So that caused some confusion from there. So that prompted people feeling like that the crop tour's number may be a bit shy. It's very possible we're not going to have the 7 million harvested acres that the USDA had because of the tough tough conditions in the western part of the state or southwestern part of the state. But that's always been an interesting approach. They've done that idea for many years of just coming up with a production number. So the wheat numbers were on the defensive. Corn, with the forecasts here, for having a couple rains, we did not really see the delays in U.S. Uh, maybe as extensive as it kind of looked like. We just didn't have the at this point it, Monday's numbers are going to be quite important here at this point. There is some areas that didn't really get a lot still planted, but there was more places that were opened up. So I think we're going to jump back closer to the averages we've have on a historical basis on Monday. So that's part of the reason we've been defensive here on the corn and soybean. Well, basically, the soybean, excuse me, the corn prices from there. The soybean prices, I think, has got a couple things going on now. So uh, plantings might not be as switched over, and you have some good points about what you're hearing down there in Rio Grande.
Yeah, so one of the major things is not only the crop losses that we'll have that well the farmers down there they were at 75% of the surface harvested, but the big thing, the major thing will be on how to transport all this crop and because all the infrastructure has been damaged, including bridges and roads and even grain bins. So it's going to be a very significant volume of soybeans that will not be able to be transported.
Really agree. I think that's something that this market really has not come to grasp with at this point. We had those heavy rains in the central part of Rio Grande, and then it swooped down into 10, excuse me, 10-inch levels. Now there was some rains earlier this week that added to it. And yeah, you're exactly right there about damaged grain bins and also just the reality of getting the final 10 or 15% of the crop, which still is in the field, it's likely not to come out. And it's mostly beans, interestingly enough. And that there's some corn around in there too. And interesting, as we all know, Rio Grande is definitely where the biggest portions of the uh, uh, livestock industry is in that and Paranon. And so it's going to be interesting as to what impact that might have. Not so much on chickens, but definitely on the beef. And there's not a huge amount of pork in production down in Brazil, but definitely the beef side of things, uh, finding feed, getting things together, getting equipment, all that kind of stuff. It's definitely going to be a tough one for Rio Grande and Paranon here to be able to find the feed and find the right type of operations there to get things going and even getting Paraguay, the port down there back and functioning is going to take a while.
Yes, and also the meat packing facilities, many of them, at least 10 of them, were not operating, fully operating during this week. So the meat sector had a significant impact. We only will know the losses of herds or the number of herds lost or once everything dries out.
True, true. And uh, boy, there's a couple, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, they had a similar situation out in Argentina where there was photos of the animals up on high ground and the water all around them. That's really a wild situation. I don't know that that was the case. I think in some ways that there wasn't the high ground, and some animals in some places didn't make it through. It's not something that's at all funny, but it's such an ironic looking situation having livestock having to be up on you know, a bluff somewhere to make sure they don't get flooded out, which that's how crazy it is. I tell you, the world's weather situation has really turned pretty crazy at this point where, we're getting these huge amounts. You're talking about 25 inches in 10 days down there in parts of Paranon. That's earlier this month. That's what do you say to that? Yeah, and it just sits there. It hasn't really moved. There's lots of theories it might move north and support the corn and the second crop corn up in Rio Grande, but hasn't moved. It's just it keeps seems to be sitting in the same spot. So there even could be some implications for the Brazilian corn crop and the second crop corn up in Mato Grosso if this thing doesn't straighten down. Because we haven't had a train up there in the last 10 days, and that could be the suggestion that the monsoons have already went completely north, and they're not going to end up getting the finish that some of these people are looking for. So,
Yes, and you also wanted to comment about the energy sector. The crude oil has kind of stabilized near the $80 level. And what do you think this will play out for the renewable energy?
well, it doesn't demand as much of the renewable scenario, or doesn't grab as much attention. But when you get set 90 bushel, $90 crude like we had earlier this spring, when there was lots of concerns about, demand, and that is one thing. The one tricky thing, or one thing that was noted this week, was that uh, the there's been an ongoing feud, of course, between the U.S. energy industry and the EIA, and some of they dropped the opportunity to they dropped I should say, the restrictions that the small refiners had, and that caused a lot of issues. And they're setting up their new things along the way here on how much we needed to have renewable fuels in the system for the last, well, I guess it's from 2020 to 23. But the interesting twist on it, and this whole thing has happened over the last 6 or 8 months, has been, and there seem to be indications earlier late last week and earlier this week, that there might be some new restrictions on the uh, Chinese secondary cooking oil uh, that they have been importing into the U.S., and that it wasn't officially in some of the original comments that were made from the Biden administration here earlier this week, but it's definitely a feature in here and there's even some people talking about the fact that the volumes of stuff that's coming in, used cooking oil is one thing, but there seems to be ideas that there might be some additional palm oil being mixed into these things to provide more dollars, or provide more volume, I should say, and that. And so that's another feature in this thing, because what's happened is that the soybean crushing industry has really uh, they had planned to see a substantial amount of this uh, renewable diesel being coming from U.S. soybean oil. Well, when the Chinese uh, started switching a lot of their secondary oils that they've already used in their cooking systems and started shipping it to the U.S., that took away that particular alternative. And it, interestingly enough, has added and kept the soybean prices, and particularly soybean oil, on a defensive. Actually, for a while here, they've even started to ship some stuff on exports because they were giving concerns. And that's part of the reason why we had a pretty uh, hefty uh, April uh, seasonal shutdown this year. The trade was looking for 183 million bushels, down about 10 to 11 million from the previous month of March. And that is, which is very, not unusual, and actually could have been a little bit high on that because we were at a record level back in March. But the feature turned out that they basically a lot more people took extended periods of slowdown because they were running out of places to put the soybean oil, and that there was some of it exported, things like that. But that's turned out to be the real twist here on this number. Interestingly enough, the soybean prices dipped a little bit on that news, but they hung in there uh, primarily because what you talked about here is the flooding issues down in Rio Grande and South America there in particular was the feature why the soybeans were getting some support towards the end of the week, plus the idea that maybe there wasn't going to be as big a switchover from corn to beans because of the weather we were receiving here in the U.S. And that because May 15th, which we passed a couple of days ago, and that the big psychological number on that. If we once you start delaying corn plantings after that, you really start putting a lot more psychological concerns about the pollination during hot weather and things like that. So the interesting world, we were kind of worried about uh, corn plantings being switched to beans, and now we're not so concerned as the weather did open up this weekend. We'll see what the numbers are. We were, as I said, 49%, which normally is around 60 to 65%. I suspect we'll see that numbers in the 65% level when we see the data from the USDA tomorrow, and we'll probably see beans up around 45 to 50%.
All right. We'll get you up next week. Thank you.